Welcome to TR Academy. In this video, we're going to see about the Crown Rule. After the revolt of 1857, all the powers that were vested with the company are transferred to the British Crown and the East Indian Company was abolished. Let's see about the acts during the Crown Rule. The Government of India Act 1858. This act was postulated after the breakout of the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. It articulated that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty, Governor-General of India became Viceroy of India, and he was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning was the first Viceroy of India. The double government system was abolished and created an office of Secretary of State who was the complete authority and had control over the entire administration. An advisory body of 15 members were formed to assist the Secretary of India and he be the chairman of the body. The system of budget was introduced in 1860. Let's see about the Indian Council Act. This is an important landmark in the history of Indian polity. These acts were made to seek the cooperation of the Indians in the administration of the British Crown. The Indian Council Act of 1861. Associating Indians in the lawmaking process, Indians are added as non-official members of the expanded advisory body. Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, Sir Dinkar Rao were the first three members to join the council. The legislative powers of Bombay and Madras presidencies are restored, which were taken by the Regulation Act of 1773. New legislative council were formed for Bengal, Northwestern Frontier provinces and Punjab during the year 1862, 1866 and 1897 respectively. Viceroy was empowered to make rules and orders. Lord Canning formed a portfolio system in 1859 under which a member of the Viceroy Council was made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council. Viceroy can also issue ordinance during an emergency without consulting the Legislative Council. The ordinance validity is for a period of 6 months. Indian Council Act of 1892. The number of additional members of the councils were increased, that is, the non-official members. The council empowered on discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. Nomination of the non-official members to this Central Legislative Council can be done by the recommendation of the Viceroy, Provincial Legislative Council and Bengal Chamber of Commerce, and to the Provisional Legislative Council by the governors, district boards, municipalities, universities, trade association, zamindars and chambers. This nomination process is now we call as election. Indian Council Act of 1909, which is also known as Morley-Minto reforms. Lord Morley was then the Secretary of the State and Lord Minto the Viceroy. Postulated the following in this act. The size of the members of the council were increased from in the central 16 members to 60 and in the provincial it was not uniform. The central council retained the official majority whereas in provincial it have no official majority. Members were allowed to ask supplementary questions, move resolutions on the budget and so on. Association of Indians with the Executive Council of the Viceroys and the Governors took place with this act. Satyendra Prasad Sinha, the first Indian to join the Executive Council, and he was the law member. Legalized communalism was brought and Lord Minto came to known as Father of Communal Electorate, as Muslims were to be elected only by the Muslim voters. Separate representation of Presidency Corporation, Chamber of Commerce, universities and zamindars are provided in this act. Government of India Act of 1919. The British government declared for the first time that its objective was the gradual introduction of responsible government in India on August 20, 1917. The Government of India Act was then enacted in 1919, which came into force in 1921. This act is also known as Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. It relaxed the control of the central over the provinces and authorized to make laws on their respective list of subjects. Diarchy, a dual scheme of governance, was to be enacted. Diarchy is a term derived from the Greek word diarche, which means double rule. According to this, the provincial subjects are divided into transferred, which are administered by the governor with the aid of the ministers responsible to the Legislative Council, and reserved were to be administered by the governor and his Executive Council without being responsible to the Legislative Council. However, this experiment was largely unsuccessful. It also introduced for the first time bicameralism and direct election in the country. Thus, the Indian Legislative Council now has a upper house, that is the Council of States, and lower house, that is the Legislative Assembly. The majority of the members of both the houses were chosen by different elections. It also postulated that 3 out of 6 members of the Viceroy Executive Council should be Indian, whereas the Commander-in-Chief was reserved. Separate electorates for Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans are provided. Franchise were granted to limited number of people on the basis of poverty, tax and education. A new office of the High Commission for India was created in London, and some functions are to be performed by the Secretary of the State for India. Establishment of a Public Service Commission, which followed by the setup of a Central Public Service Commission in 1926 for recruiting civil servants on the recommendations of the Lee Commission on Superior Civil Service in India. Provincial budget was separated from the central budget and authorized the provincial legislatures to enact their budget. It also provided for the appointment of a statutory commission to inquire into and report on its working after 10 years of its coming into force. In November 1927, 2 years before the schedule, the British government appointed a 7-member statutory commission under the chairmanship of Sir John Simon to report on the condition of India under its new constitution. This commission is called as Simon's Commission. All the parties boycotted it as all the members of the commissions were British. The commission submitted the report in 1930 and recommended the following: abolition of the diarchy system, extension of responsible government in the provinces, establishment of a federation of British India and princely states, and continuing communal electorate. The British government conducted 3 roundtable conferences on considering the proposals of the commission. A white paper on constitutional reforms was prepared and submitted to the Joint Select Committee of the British Parliament, which, after approval, incorporated with certain changes in the Government of India Act of 1935. Communal Award. Ramsay MacDonald, the British Prime Minister, announced a scheme of representation of the minorities in August 1932, which came to be known as Communal Award. It extended the separate electorate to the depressed classes, which was not accepted by Mr. Gandhiji, and he took fast unto death in Yerwada jail in Pune to get the award modified. At last, there was an agreement made between the leaders of the Congress and the depressed classes, which is known as Pune Pact, which gave reserved seats for depressed classes. Government of India Act of 1935. This marked a second milestone towards a completely responsive government in India. It was a lengthy and detailed document having 321 sections and 10 schedules. Establishment of an All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as units. It divided the powers between the centre and the units. Federal list for centre, provincial list for provinces, concurrent list for both. However, the federation never came into being as the princely states did not join it. It abolished the diarchy and introduced provincial autonomy. The provinces are to act autonomous in their defined spheres. This brought responsive government in the provinces. However, it was discontinued in 1939. Diarchy was adopted in centre, but it did not come into operation at all. Bicameralism were introduced in 6 provinces, namely Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam and the United Provinces, and it faced many restrictions. The Council of India was abolished, which was put forth by the Act of 1858. The establishment of a Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit was made. Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission were established along with the Federal Public Service Commission. Federal Court was set up in 1937. Indian Independence Act of 1947. The British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that British rule in India would end by June 30th, 1948, and the powers are transferred to the responsible Indian hands. The Muslim League agitated and demanded for partition. This brought the Mountbatten Plan, which was put forth by Lord Mountbatten, the then Viceroy of India, on June 3, 1947. The plan was accepted by both Congress and the Muslim League. It was immediately brought into act by enacting the Indian Independence Act. The bill was introduced in the British Parliament on July 4, 1947 and received the royal assent on July 18, 1947, and it came to force on August 15, 1947. This act made India as an independent and sovereign state. India and Pakistan were parted. The office of the Viceroy was abolished. A Governor General was appointed to each parted dominion by the consent of the Dominion Cabinet. And the British government was to have no responsibility with respect to the government of the India and Pakistan. It also made clear that the Dominion can frame and adopt any constitution and repeal any act put forth by the British Parliament, including the Independence Act. It abolished the office of Secretary of the State for India. It proclaimed the lapse of British paramountcy over the Indian princely states and treaty relations with the tribal areas from August 15, 1947. It granted freedom for the princely states either to join the Dominion or to remain independent. It designated the Governor General of India and all governors of the provisions as constitutional heads and act on the advice of the respective Council of Ministers in all aspects. It discontinued the appointment to civil service, and the members of the civil service appointed before August 15, 1947 would continue to enjoy all benefits that they were entitled. It also provided the Dominion to follow the constitutions of the British rule till a new constitution was formed. Lord Mountbatten was the first Governor General of the new Dominion of India, and he swore in Jawaharlal Nehru as the first Prime Minister. The Constituent Assembly of the India formed in 1946 became the parliamentary of the Indian domain.